Hey everybody, this is JD Gaming, back today with an in-depth introduction of Striker-infused. So JD, ain't you a little bit late to the party? Well, of course, you guys, if you've been following my channel for a while, know that I usually don't jump aboard the hype train. It's for a few different reasons. The first big one is I don't like investing a lot of my time and creativity into a deck knowing that it's inevitably going to get hit on the Forbidden Limited list. There's nothing worse than putting in your energy, your time into this awesome idea, not even go to an event because, you know, I don't go to those, and then your idea is just slaughtered because you chose something that you knew was going to get hit. It's just like not the best use of my time, basically. And the second thing is I've always been, just by personality in general, kind of a reverse hipster. It's like if you've heard of something, then it's already something that I don't feel interested in investing a lot of my time and energy for a similar reason. A lot of the creative, efforts have been done in that type of direction, and then it's not necessarily that there's nothing left to do, it's that it's a lot less initially interesting to me. There's not that spark that makes me want to play around with it. But a combination of a few things like Thunder Dragons knocking this deck down a peg in competition, and just a really cool idea that I wanted to try out with this theme just made me really feel, hey, it's finally time to get aboard this and figure out exactly how this archetype plays and then incorporate them into some other themes. As you guys know, Trickstar Sky Strikers is a big deal. There were some other fun decks using things like Lair of Darkness with 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 as well, and those are just some really cool ideas that, Sky Strikers have been involved in, but I had some others that I wanted to try as well with my personal JD Gaming touch, and so I wanted to make this a kind of one-stop shop for you guys so that those of you who are checking out the other deck profiles to come on my channel won't necessarily have to sit through the same, here are how, Sky Strikers work in every one of those videos. So hopefully, if you've never seen this deck before, much like me just a little while ago, then you'll have all the information you need to understand how this theme plays and why not they kind of meld well with certain archetypes as I put them into the decks going forward. So without further ado, let's introduce our new friends, or old friends, the Sky Strikers. The first step in approaching a new archetype is very similar to whenever you build a deck. Like I always say, you want to make sure you build the theme and a core that reaches the deck's goals. And here we have to start off with our ace monster. Sky Striker Ace Ray is our only main deck monster, and she's got amazing stats all around. Not necessarily the strongest, but very, very synergetic with a lot of different cards. She's a dark level 4 warrior, so very searchable and accessible by a lot of cards, and has 1500 attack and defense. So if you wanted to use a variety of stat-based searchers down the line, then theoretically you could do that as well. She has a few different abilities that make her really good in this deck. You can tribute her as a quick effect in order to special summon one of your Sky Striker Ace extra deck monsters to your extra monster zone, and that's really cool because that effect allows you to dodge a variety of hand traps and play around some other disruptive cards and still get your main plays of your extra deck monsters live onto the field. On top of that, while this card resides in your graveyard, if your extra deck monster would die either by battle or if it leaves the field because your opponent caused it with a card effect, you can go ahead and revive this card, and although that's a card once per turn, it's still awesome that then she has that other ability to tag back into another Sky Striker Ace pilot, as we'll call them, for our extra deck monsters, to basically make it so you never really run out of monsters on your board. And ultimately, that's the name of the game with Sky Strikers. It's a very control-oriented strategy that limits or maneuvers around your opponent's actions, and then is basically able to make sure it doesn't lose advantage so that, you can maintain that level of control. So Ray is where it all starts, and we can evolve her into one of 3 different pilots at the time being. There is a 4th one, but realistically, I don't think it's the best right now, the Earth one, so that's not even out yet. So we'll just talk about the other 3 for the time being. Sky Striker Ace Kagari is the fire one, and you'll find all of them have the same basic ability, or I guess summoning condition, of a non-whatever attribute the monster is, Sky Striker. So any non-fire monster can be used to summon Kagari, and that's basically Ray, who's dark, or Shizuku or Hayate, who are water and wind respectively. She starts off with the same 1500 attack, but she gets a lot stronger quickly because while this card is on the field, it gains 100 attack for every spell in your graveyard, and it doesn't care what theme that spell card belongs to. You could dump 3 copies of Toon Table of Contents while you fetch something like Toon World as an example, and you'd get 300 extra attack points on this monster because you just yarded 3 spells. The other ability, and the main reason you want to play Kagari, however, is that if this card is special summoned through any means, whether it's through its own link summon or through reviving it or special summoning it through some other card effect, you can go ahead and target one of your Sky Striker spells in your grave and add it to your hand, which basically lets you double the ability of that card. And as we'll get to down the line, that toolbox is full of so many powerful cards that the reverse toolbox ability Kagari has is insane. And as kind of a limiting text of fairness, you can only special summon Kagari once per turn. You can't even go ahead and, summon something else and then go back into Kagari using her, just to make it so you can only use her effect once per turn. So that is our main ace monster. Our second ace monster, and in some ways even more important, depending on the situation, is Sky Striker Ace Shizuku, who is water. She needs a non-water monster, therefore, and she's a machine just like all the other ones, a Link 1, and it says, monsters your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense for every spell in your graveyard, so kind of the opposite supplementary effect to Kagari's effect, and her ability is then in the end phase, and that's where it's kind of questionable how useful she is. During the end phase, if this card was special summoned during this turn, you can go and add a Sky Striker spell from your deck to your hand with a name different from any of your already yarded Sky Striker cards. So as long as you've not used a particular card, or as we'll see, can get rid of the only copy of a certain card in your graveyard, you're going to be able to go ahead and add that to your hand from your deck, and that will be good going into your turn, because the best way to use Shizuku is going to be to special summon her as kind of an ending play during your opponent's end phase or very close to it, and then you can immediately leverage that card into something that will help you. And of course, you can only summon 1 Shizuku per turn. Then our third monster is the Wind, and she has a very interesting diagonal down arrow, so maybe one day when we get a V-shaped broken Link arrow set, we'll be able to cut down on the requirements for an extra link or something using her. But essentially, Hayate needs a non-wind monster and says you can only summon 1 of these per turn. You can attack directly with her, and anytime she deals damage at all, or actually it says after damage calculation if this card battled, so theoretically it doesn't even matter whether or not you do the damage, you just have to have attacked and done some damage calculation. You can go ahead and send a Sky Striker card from your deck to the graveyard, which is important for 2 things. Not only can you Foolish Burial Goods essentially any one of your Sky Striker spells to recur with something like Kagari, but you can also go ahead and yard your ace Rei, and then Rei can go and make sure that when Hayate falls you recycle it into Rei, and then Rei can tag out into a Shizuku or a Kagari in order to get you free cards. So overall, pretty solid. The Earth one basically gives you some life points and makes it so that your opponent's monster cannot attack for the duration of the turn cycle, so your opponent's turn and your own turn. And while it's interesting and adds another layer of depth to the theme, it's not necessarily the most important thing. It's not something that's going to be so transformative that the way the deck plays is different. And again, since the card's not even out yet, I decided to focus on just these 3 for now. Now that we've talked about all 4 of our Sky Striker Ace monsters, we move on to the spells, and you gotta keep in mind that the whole theme of this deck is to gain you resources that will then allow you to consistently control the game through its very interesting control cards. They all fall into the same pattern. For activation, they must have it so that you have no monsters in your main monster zone. You can have something in your extra monster zone, or you can have no monsters at all, but you can't have something in your main monster zones, and that's kind of to make things fair. But you'll find, depending on the theme you're working with, there are some creative ways that you can get around that requirement so that it's not so much of a problem, even if you do have something that may normally go into the main monster zone. Then they have 2 effects. The first effect is something that just happens as long as you are able to play it, meeting that first condition of having no monsters in your main zones. And then the second is kind of an unlock effect, as I like to call it, where if you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard of any theme, or no theme at all, you're able to go ahead and gain a bonus effect after using the first. And it all begins with 3 copies of Sky Striker Mobilize Engage. So as its name suggests, this is your starter card. Its first effect is to Rhoda out or search any Sky Striker card from your deck to your hand, which is going to add you your Rei, or it's going to add you any other spell in your deck that's in this theme, as long as it's not called Sky Striker Mobilize Engage, because that would be too busted. This card is not a hard once per turn. And that's what really makes it broken. The unlock effect is to go ahead and draw an additional card, and whereas that looks kind of like, hey, that's just Rhoda plus Upstart Goblin, is that really that good? Well, yes, it's good because it's in one card, and that ends up giving you one extra card overall. If you started off with 5 cards including an engage, your one engage replaces itself by searching, let's say, Ray to your hand, and now all of a sudden you draw an additional, you're up to 6. One more than your initial hand, and although it's, two simple effects put together, it becomes much like a Pot of Greed in a lot of ways, especially when you're able to recycle it with your Kagari, and then she can go ahead and allow you to play 2 of these back to back. So very, very powerful card. Especially when you combine it with the next card here, because when you're able to search anything, why not search Sky Striker Mecha Hornet Drones? This card's at 1 right now in both TCG and OCG, and for good reason. It's a quick play spell that says if you control no monsters in your main zone, so meet the condition, you can special summon a Sky Striker Ace token who's a Dark Warrior, level 1 with 0 attack and defense in defense position, and it cannot be tributed, so you could still use it for a variety of link summons. It's still a normal monster, so you could use it for something like Link Spider, or you could play it in World Chalice as an example. You could go ahead and use it for its dark attribute, its warrior typing, for its level 1 status into Link Karibo, lots of different things, and its unlock effect simply gives it 1500 attack and defense points. Not the most useful thing, but basically there's a very simple combo where you go engage into your Hornet Drones, and then that will let you turn the token into Kagari, who will let you add this back to your hand. And if you were able to get 2 more spells into the grave in addition to this Hornet Drones, now you can activate engage again for another search and a free draw on top of that. So 1 or however many maximum really copies of Hornet Drones you can get your hands on is probably going to help a lot. And the limiting here really just hurts the consistency of Sky Striker builds that don't want to play Ray, because she usually will take a normal summon, but Hornet Drones kind of circumvents that issue. Then the next quick play spell is Widow Anchor. So this is another Sky Striker mecha, and this is a card I like playing in a lot of builds. Depending on what deck it is, it may go down, but it's a very powerful one. Its primary effect is to target a face-up monster on the field and negate its abilities, and that's really cool because it's just a forbidden chalice that you can search at any time, and it doesn't give it the extra 400 boost that chalice does. So searchability, flexibility, all around very powerful card, and its unlock ability lets you then go and steal your opponent's negated monster if you so choose. Do keep in mind that does put a monster into your main monster zones, and it shuts off all your other Sky Striker cards for the rest of the turn, unless you can get rid of them somehow with some other card. But it's a very powerful way of stealing your opponent's high link rating monsters and turn them into your own fighters, and so usually on top of 3 of each of the Sky Striker Ace pilots, the extra deck will consist of 6 other high linking materials, basically a link 2, or 1 or 2 link 2s, 1 or 2 link 3s, maybe 1 or 2 link 4s, and you'll be able to climb up using your opponent's resources against them. So Widow Anchor is a very powerful card in its ability to just stop your opponent's effects in their tracks and potentially steal their monsters to turn them against them. And then the last of, actually I suppose we have 2, penultimate quick play spell is Sky Striker Mecha Eagle Booster. This is a card people like teching at 1 or 2 generally because of its searchability, but it's very powerful. If you control no monsters in your main monster zone, and I say that because it's pretty important for this one, you target a face-up monster on the field, usually it's just going to be your own extra monster guy. That target's unaffected by card effects this turn except its own, and its unlock ability is it's also immune to being destroyed by battle this turn. So very powerful for making your pilots not die even without having Ace in the graveyard, and there's some pretty interesting other cards that you could protect with this as well. Let's say you're just summoning a 𝗪𝗓𝗓 in a deck. If you have no monsters in your main monster zones, you can protect that thing and make it so your opponent is locked out of their deck for even longer. Or a card that, just resides in the extra deck. Anything that goes into the extra monster zone will basically allow you to use this as long as you have no other monsters already, and so it adds a lot of protection at a searchable name tag here in order to make it so that your monsters last longer than they usually would, and you get extra abilities out of them. So Eagle Booster is quite powerful because of that, usually again a 1 or 2 of as a tech. And then the last quick play spell now is Sky Striker Mecha Shark Cannon, which basically says its normal effect is to banish a monster in your opponent's graveyard. pretty flexible nowadays when you're able to use it on things like Destiny Hero Malicious and a variety of other graveyard-oriented threats, but its unlock ability is simply to steal that monster to your side of the field as a special summon instead. It can't attack, but its effects are still allowed to be used, and because it doesn't care about the positions, you can grab anything, Link monster or not, which again allows you to Link climb using your opponent's cards. And as a searchable card that you can, recycle your engage and stuff within this theme, Shark Cannon becomes a powerful one-of in this deck. Even if you decide not to, you can go ahead and side it, of course, because it is a very DD Crow-esque card that you're able to use. Then from here, we talk about two normal spells, Sky Striker Maneuver Afterburners and Jamming Waves. So on the left here is Afterburners, the fiery one, and it's kind of the opposite of Jamming Waves here. So if you control no monsters in your main zones, you could target a face-up monster on the field and destroy it. Then, if you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard, you could destroy one spell or trap on the field. So kill a monster, and then if you end up with 3 or more in your graveyard, you could go ahead and pop a spell or trap as a bonus, which again is going to net you advantage because you're not just doing a 1-for-1 trade, you're actually killing 2 of your opponent's cards for your 1. Jamming Waves then does the reverse, as you may expect. It lets you go and kill a set spell or trap card on the field, and then, if you have 3 or more spells in your grave, destroy a monster on the field. And the cool thing with how these cards are worded is that Jamming Waves especially says then for that second unlock effect, which means you can kill one of your own set cards, and then let's say you killed a set spell card. Then if you hit 3 cards because you destroyed it, because you will destroy as resolving that first part of the effect, you're able to then unlock your second effect and immediately kill a monster, even if you started off with 2 spells in your grave and went up to 3 during the resolution of Jamming Wave. So very interesting thing to keep in mind, and the reason you play one of each of these is because they're very searchable. Jamming Waves, even in formats where you don't have a lot of back row you have to fight against in your opponent's decks, you can go ahead and use it on your own cards, combo off, kind of like Metal Foes used to, to get rid of their combination or whatever. You could go ahead and use Jamming Waves on your own spells to get them to the graveyard and hopefully hit the 3 cards as soon as possible to make the most out of your power play spells. So very important one-ofs here. And then the last of the standard effect cards, and even then it's kind of odd, is Sky Striker 𝗪𝗧𝗡𝗪 Hercules base. So this is the only equip card in the theme at the moment, and it says to activate this card, you have to have no monsters in your main monster zone. So once you have it equipped, it doesn't matter whether or not you maintain no monsters in your main zones. The equipped monster cannot attack directly, oh man, but in exchange it gets a second attack on monsters during each battle phase, and if the equipped monster kills a monster in battle, you get to draw a card. So now you have a monster, let's say you strap this onto 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪, who now has a huge attack boost thanks to all your spells in your grave, and Hercules base lets her attack 2 monsters, and then you draw 2 cards off of it, essentially turning this into a battle-oriented Pot of Greed, which isn't bad because this card is fully searchable just like the other cards. On top of that, it has the same unlock ability type of thing, except instead of following that pattern exactly, it says if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard by a card effect, so make sure you listen to the tech section here because it'll combo nicely with that stuff. You can go and target up to 3 of your Sky Striker cards in your graveyard except 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪, Hercules base, and shuffle them into the deck. And what that does is it lets you make sure you never run out of engages to search or your 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪s to research and all this stuff. It makes it so you don't run out of resources, and overall it's a very powerful card for the mirror match and other long grinding games where you don't want to run out of resources in Steam before your opponent does. So very powerful one of as well. And then we have 2 spells here that don't really fit the exact pattern as well. I suppose Hercules base is kind of, going towards a different direction, but these especially are totally different. 3 copies, or some people like teching 1 copy, but usually you'll see some quantity of Sky Striker Mecha Modules multi-roll. This is the only continuous spell in the theme, and it says once per turn, you could target any other card you control, face up or face down, monster spell or trap, field spell, doesn't matter. Send that card to the graveyard. Also, your opponent cannot respond to any of your spell activations for the rest of this turn, even if this card were to leave the field. And that's really cool because you're basically saying, hey, if you're not stopping this right now with a Ghost Ogre or something, I'm going to go and play all my engages through Ash Blossom and you're not allowed to play them in response. Pretty solid for this theme. It does say you can only gain this previous effect once per turn, but that's just, whatever. Once per turn on top of that, during your end phase, you can set Sky Striker spells with different names from your graveyard up to the number of Sky Striker spells you activated this turn while this was face up on your field, but banish them when they leave the field. In a pure deck, you want to see this as early as possible. Although it doesn't get your deck going per se, like the next field spell we're going to talk about, multi-roll is insane in that it's very reminiscent of Spellbook of Judgment. Every time you play one of those Sky Striker cards, like every engage you play that gives you a plus, you're now able to then duplicate into retrieving said card or some other card in your graveyard. You can reverse toolbox things up to the number of things that you use, and yeah, they get banished after you use them, but especially when you're playing quick play spells like Widow Anchor and Shark Cannon and Eagle Booster, you're able to go and make immediate use out of those cards to hinder your opponent not once, but twice, and that resource game is what really makes it difficult for a lot of random rogue decks to deal with this type of strategy. If you're teching this engine into another deck or theme with fewer copies of your Sky Striker cards, then this is something that you could go down to 1 on and then still search it when you need to, but it's a very powerful card to basically give you additional uses out of your Sky Striker cards that you may not have access to from having just maximized the counts within your deck building. So very powerful card. I personally like it at 3 because of how powerful it is. Then we have, for our last Sky Striker card, Sky Striker Airspace Area 0, and sorry, I bumped the camera just a little bit there, but essentially, I like playing this card at 2, along with 2 copies of Terraforming, and that's where, you know, a lot of fun stuff happens, because now you can potentially mix this with any theme that uses your field spells as well. Area 0 has 2 effects as well. The first is you could target one other card you control and excavate the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you do, add one of the excavated Sky Striker cards to your hand if you would like, and shuffle the rest back into the deck. Then if you happen to excavate a Sky Striker card, whether or not you added it to your hand, you have to send the card you originally targeted to the graveyard. So let's say I have a monster in my main monster zone that I no longer want. I want to clear them out so I can play my cards. Hey, I can go ahead and Area 0 that card to the graveyard while digging for a new fresh option. Or I can set a spell card and then go and target that. If I excavate a Sky Striker card, send that spell to the graveyard, and that helps me hit the 3 cards necessary in the graveyard in order to resolve the unlock effects of all my cards. And then its second ability is, if this card in your field zone, face up or face down, is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon a Sky Striker Ace monster from your deck. You can only use each effect of Area 0 once per turn, but that basically means, hey, any copies of Destruction you have that you can turn into your Area 0 will then become a free special summon of Sky Striker Ace Ray, which will launch you right into your recursive and other controlling plays with your pilots. So that's why we play that. From here, we're going to finish off this discussion by going over a few tech choices that are usually seen in pure Sky Strikers, in optimal, increase, maximize quantities, and then some other cards that you may be using in other tech decks as well. So the first thing is you'll usually see any number of Foolish Burial Goods, which lets you go and send a spell or trap, but in this deck, spell, from your deck to the graveyard. You can only activate one of these per turn, that's why you generally stick with 2, but honestly, you could get away with 3. You usually play with this a single Metal Foes Fusion, because although you're not summoning Metal Foes Fusion monsters in this deck, Metal Foes Fusion does have that neat recycling ability to shuffle itself into the deck once per turn, and so essentially this will temporarily yard you 2 spells in the grave for 1 activation. You activate any other card, and then once it's yarded, hey, that's your 3 you need, which is awesome. And then, after all that's said and done, you have some extra spells in your grave. Metal Foes Fusion goes back into the deck, and you essentially upstarted off the Foolish Burial Goods, so you didn't lose anything in the long run. So, temporary boost in your spell count for the graveyard by 2, and then you can make sure you don't lose any resources in the process. There's also some really funny interactions you can use with Foolish Burial Goods in other decks that you can mix as well, and that's where Foolish Burial Goods is, just really fun in this strategy. It's another point where Sky Strikers can meld with other themes just because of the tech that you play that really synergizes with the core of the deck, and I really like how Foolish Burial Goods functions in some of those hybrid strategies. Then, you usually want to play 3 copies of Twin Twister, even if your opponent's not playing a ton of spell and trap cards. Of course, right now, at the time of recording this video, and when it's probably going to be launched, you're going to see a lot of spells and traps, right? you're going to play against a lot of themes that use trap cards, mirror matches of Sky Strikers where they set a lot of quick play spells, and there's a lot of value to be had. But on top of all that, discarding a spell card, hey, that means I get 2 spell cards between this and my discard to the graveyard upon resolution. I can also go and set my own spell next to it, and yeah, it will cost me the discard, Twin Twisters, and a spell I choose to destroy, but it single-handedly gets me 3 cards instantly, and that type of control is just so good to make sure your plays start off. Once you start resolving engage for the +1, you're going to not worry about resources. It's really going to be how many free cards can you get. And so Twin Twisters is awesome in that it sets all of that up for you so that the rest of the deck can function as intended and you don't have to worry about bricking quite as much. On top of that, some people like playing some quantity of Mystical Space Typhoon. I like maxing out on the 3 in a pure build just because it does the exact same thing. You can't discard with it, but you're still able to go ahead and trigger your airspace. You can go ahead and get an additional spell in the graveyard. You know, the fact that this plus any set spell is going to be 2 spells in your graveyard means it's a lot easier to end up with the 3. So even if you go and activate your engage the first time for a Hornet Drones, and you have to use this thing to kill another spell. Well, now you can go ahead and Hornet Drones token into your Kagari. You have 3 between Mystical Space Typhoon, Hornet Drones, and whatever else you killed, and then that engage does go for 2 cards instantly. And don't forget, anytime you have a quick play spell destroyer like the Twin Twisters or Mystical Space Typhoon, you could chain it onto your Hornet Drones just to send itself to the graveyard, and you don't have to burn any additional cards. Since they're both quick play spells, you essentially activate Hornet Drones, activate Mystical Space Typhoon or Twin Twisters, target your Hornet Drones, both of those go to the graveyard, and I don't care because I'm not burning any additional resources by having to kill a 3rd card in order to get to the 3 sweet spot in the graveyard. So very powerful, flexible cards for that reason. And then the last few cards here are just about, you know, making sure we consistently get to our engine pieces. 1 copy of Rhoda, because it will let us search our Sky Striker Ace Ray, and some people don't like playing this just because they don't like playing Ray in general, but usually nowadays, especially with Hornet Drones at 1 copy of Ray isn't a bad pick. Rhoda is again another nice launching point or melding point where we can go ahead and combine it with other archetypes that involve warriors, and that allows for a lot of creative options as well, which is really, really cool. And then from here, you usually will see 1 copy of Upstart Goblin as your 40th card because it's a free spell in your graveyard. You don't care about your opponent gaining 1,000 life. It is important to note the life points don't matter in this deck as much because it's not a 1-turn kill deck. This deck plays a slow, grinding game, neutralizes the opponent's threats, makes their resources fight for you instead of them, and then kills them over time. Very rarely are you going to OTK with Sky Strikers unless you have like a specific build in order to maximize damage output. Like the core cards just don't do a lot of damage. Sometimes you're poking for 1500 with 𝗖𝗍𝗓𝗓, or you just have, you know, a Kagari with a decent amount of attack, but even a 3k beater can't do game-ending damage if it's your only monster, you know. But Upstart Goblin essentially adds 1 spell for free, and it does increase the consistency by a little smidge, you know, by making it so your deck is 1 fewer card essentially. And then the last tech card that you'll usually see in pure variants especially is 3 copies of Shared Ride, especially potent now. If you think about why Thunder Dragons are so good, it's because of all the free searching people do, and Shared Ride is essentially a quick play version of Max C, but instead of triggering draws on special summons, it counts every time your opponent adds a card or cards from their deck or graveyard to their hand, which is anytime they're recurring things or anytime they're searching things with their Rhoda or whatever on-theme searcher they have. And Shared Ride, of course, is phenomenal in the mirror match as well. The fact that it's a spell card that's fully chainable means you can just ditch to the graveyard if you need to, and all around it is a solid card for not only meeting your primary goal of hitting that sweet spot of 3, but also making sure that you draw into your pieces in the first place. And there you have it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this quick introduction to how Sky Strikers play. Again, the reason for this series is because I found a lot of times in the past I would rebuild the same decks and profile them at least once a format, and it was kind of tiring for me to have to say the same 10-minute spiel every time, and for you guys, I'm sure, to have to watch the same thing again and again. Since I expect Sky Strikers to be, at least temporarily, until they get slain by the ban list, regular occurrence in some capacity on my channel, just mixing them up with some very interesting themes. I figured why not go ahead and turn it into an opportunity to introduce the theme to you guys if you've been avoiding it like I have, so you'll know what's up when you see those. But let me know down below what you think of this type of content and what you think about Sky Strikers in general. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Hope you guys enjoyed as always. This is JD Gaming, and I'll see you guys next time. That's the end of this video, but there's plenty more where it came from. I invite you to explore the playlists on screen to see what else I have to offer. And if you really liked what you saw today, consider subscribing to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming. Hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.